listeners, and welcome back to the Victim to Victor podcast. My name is Anu and I'm your host. In this podcast episode, I have Lizbeth Meredith on my show. Lizbeth is a writer, speaker, and online teacher based in Alaska with a bachelor's degree in journalism and a master's degree in psychology. She has worked as a domestic violence advocate and a child abuse investigator, and retired from government service of 2 decades as a juvenile probation survivor with at-risk teens. In 1994, Lizbeth's life turned upside down. She said goodbye to her 4 and 6-year-old daughters for a visit with a non-custodial father, only to learn days later that they had been kidnapped and taken to the father's home country of Greece. At the age of 29, Lizbeth now faced a $100,000 problem on a $10 an hour budget. For the next 2 years, fueled by memories of her own childhood kidnapping, Lizbeth traded in her small life for a life more public, traveling to the White House and Greece. It was a generous community of Anchorage, which became Lizbeth's makeshift family. One that was replicated by a growing number of Greeks and expats overseas who helped Lizbeth navigate the turbulent path leading her back to her daughters. Hello, Lizbeth. How are you?
I am so terrific, Anu. Thank you for having me today. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, me too. Yes, absolutely. And it's such an honor to have you on the show because I've read up a lot about you. You're all over the internet because you have a story to tell. And that's why I'm so eager to have you on the show. So thank you so much. Because you're a prime example of someone who was once a victim and now you're a victor, sharing your story, a published author and speaker, podcaster. I think you're doing a wide variety of different, arenas of which we're so excited to hear about. So tell us about yourself. So where you're from and, your background of your family and history.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's just so fun to be here, especially because you're so far away, and we're connecting like we're in the same room. So that's terrific. But anyway, right now I'm patching in from Anchorage, Alaska. Are you there?
Oh, nice. Yes.
Okay, good. But I definitely was born in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we lived in a tiny little town in Bee Spring, Kentucky, my family. I don't remember any of this, but I was born in the big hospital in Louisville. What I remember is as a child being in Alaska as a very small kid and thinking, this doesn't feel like home. And these can't be my people. I was just a very judgmental kid, and we lived in a very chaotic household. But the truth is, Alaska, when I was small, did not feel like home. And I was a dark-headed child with a whole bunch of blonde-headed, beautiful little girls around me that were my sisters. And I just felt like something was really off. Yeah. And I kind of vowed to myself when I was young, I'm going to do different. We have a chaotic home, lots of screaming, kids sort of disappearing, marriage, divorce. I'm going to do different. When I grow up one day, I'll be a mother, that my kids will never be subjected to divorce. Later on, I learned that the person who was kind of standing in as my father was not my father, and that I had been taken away, abruptly kidnapped as a child so that my mother could not have to worry about the custody proceedings and things like that, and just sort of disappeared with some of her kids, but not all of her kids. So she kind of selected a select few and left some behind. And so I just thought, that's not going to be my kids. My kids will never have a second parent. They're not going to be looking up a parent by lawyer. They are going to have a different life than what I've had. And I think a lot of us think that when we're young, we think, I'm going to do better. And then fast forward, when I'm in my 20s, I'm in a foreign country, I'm in Greece, looking for my own kidnapped daughters. Wow. I think what I didn't realize was that it takes a lot more than good intentions to just create the future that we want to create.
Yes.
So that is sort of my life in a nutshell. I married someone who sort of replicated my mother's control and scariness. And, I met him, and in nanoseconds, he seemed to fall in love with me. And I just was all about that. And,
Wow.
and so I got married and had 2 beautiful little girls, and thought that by the time the relationship became very volatile, that I would definitely leave and not subject them to that. I would have to have a divorce, but I would definitely raise them in a safe home.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I didn't realize was sometimes when you leave abuse and you get stronger, that only promotes more retribution. And so 4 years after I left my abusive husband, he took our daughters that he didn't often visit and disappeared out of the country as a final retaliatory act to me.
Wow. Oh, goodness.
I know.
So he was actually from Greece, right? Originally?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. He was a US citizen when I met him, but he was actually from Greece.
Right. Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. So what was your first reaction? I mean, how did you find out?
We had been apart for 4 years. That's so unusual in child kidnappings, I've learned. That normally that kind of thing happens right after you leave, or, sooner, but maybe before you were thinking about leaving, if it happens. It doesn't happen 4 years later. So when I went to pick up the kids and they weren't at the daycare, at first it was just annoying and kind of a bad feeling in my stomach. But even an hour or 2 later, I knew that the unthinkable had happened. And so it was horrifying, but it was even harder to get local police to take it seriously. And so, but it was back in the day. They weren't trying to do anything wrong. We just, in Anchorage, Alaska, we're not dealing with a whole lot of international parental kidnappings. And so when I called the police, what they thought was I was just a histrionic, sort of like, why are you making such a big deal of this, ma'am? He's their father. Let him have extra time with his kids. Why don't you?
Yeah.
And so it took a while for them to kind of jump on board, but it was truly horrifying because I chose to leave him. My kids were in jeopardy, is how that felt.
Absolutely. Yeah. After 4 years as well. I mean, it does make you think just how long people can actually hold a grudge for, if they don't get healed. And so did you feel that was the case with him? I mean, did he not have his own healing process that he went through?
I think that's such a good point, Anu. I think we suspect that people will just get over it. And yet I think I was one of those classic cases where he had at first put me on a pedestal when we very first met.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's only one way to go when someone wants to marry you or be with you constantly when you first met and everything you do is perfect. You can only fall downhill.
Yeah.
And once I left him, and it felt like such a betrayal to him, like he had thought I was the person who would never leave. I would tolerate anything. He once said to me, I picked you because I knew you'd been abused. I chose you.
Wow.
And that was very honest. That was very insightful, but how diabolical. And so he didn't choose to go on a healing path because frankly, he didn't think there was anything wrong with him. I was the one with the problem. And so, he did not do anything to heal. He just kept doing that sort of like trying to scare me back to him and then trying to romance me back to him for several years.
Do you feel that he had a condition? Like, there's a lot of sociopathic tendencies that, a lot of these behavior characteristics kind of relate to.
Right. It's so interesting because, even when he kidnapped my daughters, I was already working as a domestic violence advocate. And so I was working with, abused women at the time that he took the girls. And back then we didn't really focus so much. It's a changed world in working with abusive relationships because now people are very open about saying, oh, he's a narcissist or this person's a psychopath or a sociopath. And typically I would say those are like labels that mental health professionals used to use.
Yeah.
But I would have to say, if I'm looking at it now, when I look through the symptom cluster, I would say, and it wasn't specific to his family. He had a very nice family,
Okay.
but he does demonstrate, did and does demonstrate narcissistic tendencies, and very likely could fall on that continuum of antisocial personality. He did not have remorse that was true remorse. He had remorse for being held accountable. He had remorse for feeling consequences of his behavior.
Yeah.
He had no remorse toward what his behavior caused other people.
Interesting. And that again, that is a common trait where they lack empathy and compassion. It's everybody else's fault, and everyone, they're the victims.
Yes.
And, everyone else is a culprit. Wow.
I so agree. I just listened to a wonderful audiobook about a young woman going through a relationship breakup, but she went into great detail about being a narcissist and the different phases in a narcissist relationship. And I thought those really did apply. That was very interesting, and those applied.
Yeah. And so what happened after that then with your kids?
Well, I was making very little money as a domestic violence advocate. So I was like right at the poverty level, and was told this happened in 1994, that this would be a $100,000 problem.
Wow.
So I knew it was much greater than I could do alone. Not that anyone ever needs to go through something like abuse alone, because that's the worst thing. Right. But I was so fortunate in that I was in a very caring community. Wow. And I worked at a place where they were already dealing with domestic violence victims and the aftermath of some victims choosing to leave. Mm. And then remember, and back in our day in America, sports star Nicole Brown O.J. Simpson's wife was murdered. And suddenly everyone started talking about domestic abuse. Oh, and I bring this up because mine happened, and then that happened. And suddenly those two things sort of fused in people's minds. And so the community really rallied to help. What can we do? How can we help solve this? Do we need to throw a fundraiser? Do you need frequent flyer miles? What is it that you need? Because you've got to be able to get and reunite with your daughters. So I was really surrounded by a lot of people who understood how serious it was and who were incredibly generous.
Wow. And this is in Alaska, in your hometown? Yeah.
It's in Alaska. And Anu, I will also say that when I went to Greece, what people told me, I went twice to find my kids. The first time I went, Greek people told me, hey, Greeks stand up for one another. Don't expect any help. Yeah. Don't go down there and make a fuss. Don't look like somebody who's being disrespectful. I couldn't have found more amazing people. And it may be a testimony to how unlikable my children's father is, but people were willing to roll up their sleeves and help. And I met some incredible, dear people that to this day are my friends, who are part of my life. So I was very fortunate. But I think there was an instinctive, universal appeal about a mother and her children being separated, that people wanted to help. And it was beautiful. In the midst of that tragedy, it was amazing.
What happened? Did you fly out to Greece, and was there a court hearing?
We had court hearing after court hearing. I could barely hear you.
Okay. Oops. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, I had so many court hearings, it felt like, but I really didn't. The first time I went to Greece, we had a private investigator to try to locate the children. And so I had custody of the children in the United States. The Greek court said they would recognize and enforce that custody order. And then, unfortunately, by accident, someone in the American government tipped off my former husband. And so he took the kids further into hiding. So the first trip was a failure. The second trip, I went back a year later. And of course, by that time, we're really losing ground. And we had court hearings, got a different investigator, And in the end, I ended up being arrested over there. So, I don't want to give too many details because I know we're on a time crunch, but it was seriously scary. I know it was so scary to be somewhere where you don't necessarily speak the language fluently, looking for your kids. And then the next thing you know, you're like, doors are closing around you, in trouble. So it was not easy. And if it weren't for the help of people across the globe, my kids and I would not be together.
Wow. And then finally you got together with the help of the courts, right?
There you are. With the help of the courts?
Yeah.
I would say no. Eventually, we had a wonderful court hearing. Fantastic. It could not have been better.
Wow.
And then we had to wait and wait and wait for the court decision. It was only later, let me tell you, that I learned that my smart former husband had hired a lawyer whose own spouse supervised all the judges in the district.
Goodness.
So it shouldn't be a great surprise that I lost custody of my children, that the Greek courts reversed their earlier decision and said, pony up your children.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So that was the help I got from the courts.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Corruption, right?
Yes.
They generally are, aren't they?
So it is. It was a very, very stressful time.
Yeah.
I will say this, that when I came home finally with my children, it had been more than 2 years since they had been gone. They didn't speak English when we first reunited. They were not English speakers.
Oh my God. How many years were they there?
2 years.
Wow.
2 years. And they were little bitty girls. So when we came home and they received a hero's welcome, what I didn't expect was the heavy lifting happens in the healing. Yeah. All the other stuff was easy. This next decade was going to be really hard. And it was. And I was not necessarily the best at it, Anu. I really struggled to parent traumatized children, but they are amazing humans. Yes. They are.
Wow. Do they, how old are they now?
They are 32 and 33.
Oh my goodness. And
they both have college degrees, which I'm so proud of, because often single soul supporting parents, that's not the case when you raise children. And they both have lots of scar tissue. They would be the first to say that it's a part of their lives. Yeah. For the youngest, it hit her health very hard.
Okay.
For my oldest daughter, more mental health. It's very, very, very traumatic. It was. And so I'm not going to say, wow, that went great, happily ever after. No, on the other hand, they're amazing people.
Yeah.
And they do a lot in their community, and they just are strong and resilient. Wow. And I think for your listeners, just reminding people, it's amazing what a person can go through, but no one needs to do it alone.
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic of discussion for everybody. Support is essential, and community support, I think, more so than ever, it's the biggest cure for depression and mental health. It's to have a supportive community around you. And it's been scientifically proven as well. The stats are there that, without a community around you, and isolation is the biggest cause of death.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, really this important. Last year was really hard on abuse survivors. Exactly. That was really difficult, and I can't imagine. But I will say that whatever someone's going through, there's someone else who's been there or who will be there, but who's willing to listen, even if the support is online, even if that support is in a Facebook group. It's still connecting with others. And I just would encourage, I was not a superhero, never have been, but with support. And then I went to therapy, sometimes went to peer support groups.
Okay.
I have no shyness about getting help when I need it. Yes. And, unpacking, because I think it's easy to keep these stories inside us, and they fester if we're not careful and we don't unpack them. Those are the things that are going to kill us. But if we can share and unpack some of these things, it can be a great asset.
You can, absolutely, yeah. And I think talking therapy, people just don't even realize the power of just talking, communicating, just expressing emotions and just tragedies that, that one has gone through. I mean, and I'm sure your daughters, because how old were they when they were in Greece?
They were 4 and 6, the height of their cuteness. Oh my gosh. Those ages in a child's life. I remember at the time even thinking, I hope I find them before they have permanent teeth. And that was like such a thing for me. Yeah. Was like, I just don't want them to get so old, but it was tragic. It was tragic, but then it was so exciting to have them home.
Because do you reckon do they remember much? Do they have any flashbacks? Okay.
Yes.
So would you say it's PTSD that they might have now? Okay.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, they both go to therapy. However, I will say that even as they've gotten older, my oldest daughter in particular, she told me of a memory just about a month ago. She told me something. I'd never heard anything like it, but she's just starting to, as it feels safer, share some of those stories. And she doesn't always share them with me because I can't fix them. I'm not a therapist, but it's amazing. Yeah, they have strong memories of that time. And don't get me wrong, they have some good memories because Greece is a lovely place. And I will say this, that if your children are taken to a country that in general likes children, so much better. Much better, right? And Greeks love children. It's a wonderful culture with great food and great people.
Yeah.
And so even some of the strangers that had to help them when their dad would take off for a few days at a time, take off. They were 6 years old. They're by themselves. No babysitter. Yeah. And, in Greece, you can lock yourself out the door as a small child and not be molested, very likely.
Yes. Yeah.
So, they have some very great memories about Greece and horrible memories about being in hiding, living in hiding. So imagine COVID for a year and imagine being small children and doing that for 2 years, but then you have the shame being told you can't tell anyone. Don't talk to anyone.
Yeah, and I think the worst is being away from their mama.
Yes.
Mama, maternal instinct. It's like we're the most important beings for our children, right?
Right.
I'm not being biased or anything, but we carried our children. Come on.
We did carry them, and dads can be irreplaceable. And my kids were always sad that I never remarried because they'd always wanted a good dad. The role of a dad can never be underestimated, but the role of a bad parent also can never be underestimated. So,
I know.
Yikes.
So where are you today? What are you doing? Share with us.
I'm so happy to tell you that I enjoyed really powerful work that also helped in my healing journey. Yeah. So for me, I first started as a domestic violence advocate after my first degree. Then I got a graduate degree in psychology. And I went to work as a child abuse investigator and then later for 20 years as a juvenile probation supervisor. So I just retired. Now I had written the book before then, right? Pieces of Me, which is optioned for television. And we will see if it happens within the next month or so. We'll know more if it goes into production this year. But we'll see. We'll see. Yes, those things can always go sideways, but that's very exciting.
Yeah.
So I wrote the book, and now it's fun because I get to define my life a little more. I'm in the process right now of moving to Tennessee. And so it's the first time I've selected to be away from my children, but they're in their 30s, and it's time. It's time for me to grow up and say, they're doing great. It's me who thinks they need me. They're fine.
Okay. Oh, fantastic.
And so I love podcasting, and I very much enjoy writing and do speaking gigs and starting to do some coaching for midlife women who are needing help making it through some of those different transitions, whether it's empty nesting or a divorce or just trying to find themselves on the top 10 of their priority list.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And so what's the name of your book?
So it is called Pieces of Me, Rescuing My Kidnapped Daughters.
Yes. So there you go, listeners. You can find it all over Google. If you want to Google up Lizbeth Meredith, you will see her all over there. Famous that she is, and now she will be on TV. We will see you on TV.
Thank you, Anu. I love when you and I were talking. There's a true story that people, because there's something, we're genetically wired as humans to just be a little more on the negative side. So I am so lucky that I just had this awful life because people love to share it. It's like the best marketing ever is to have an awful life. But now it's so great. I worry future books won't be as exciting.
It's so true. That's the same with my story. I've had such an awful life. And now I'm out there podcasting it. And it's a shame. It's like we're creating such beauty out of such tragedy, you know?
That is fun, though. That is good to create beauty out of it. And it's also good and you to laugh about things, too. I mean, I think that's a part of the healing journey is to find humor where you can. So
absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I think it's a big signal that, we're healed or we're kind of near healed. Right. when you can actually create humor out of it, because I know back then there's no way it was serious. I was like, no, can't believe this has happened to me. I was such a victim. Right. Victim mentality. So yeah.
And look at you, you're doing beautifully.
Oh, thank you. And so are you.
Thank you.
But it's been such an honor to have you on my show. Thank you so much. You're amazing.
I have so loved it. Thank you very much for having me.
You just, great energy, and can't wait to see more of you out there. So keep thriving, keep flourishing, and keep creating.
Thank you. I will, and you as well. I really appreciate your podcast. I've been listening. So thank you, Anu.
Thank you so much. Brilliant. All right. So there you go, listeners. That was Lizbeth Meredith. I will add all her details on my description on the podcast, where you can connect with her and look up her book and details of her. And again, it's been such an honor to have such an amazing Victor on my show. And I look forward to the next show with you guys. Thank you, Lizbeth.
Thank you.
And while this episode comes to an end, you may want to check out my book, Victim to Victor, now available on audio, and where I have shared my journey of evolving through self-help and a determination to cast off my damaging past. My goal is to reach out to fellow survivors of abuse and provide hope and motivation in their lives. I hope that I can help victors transform their lives and achieve amelioration in the process of discovering their true self. I also have a 12-week self-development plan, which is absolutely free, and it aims to guide you on your journey to recovery. You can find the link in the description below. Please like this podcast and tag or share it with somebody whom you know is going through a similar situation and may need help. I will be back with another podcast soon. Until then, take care and stay empowered.